Welcome to Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast. This is Bruce Hutchin, host and executive producer. Each week you will hear tips, techniques, strategies, and personal stories from some of the best and funniest whitetail hunters in North America. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do, tell a friend on social media. If not, tell me and I'll make it better. Thanks for listening, folks. This is Whitetail Rendezvous Podcast, episode number 388. Welcome to another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous. This is your host and the executive producer of Whitetail Rendezvous, Bruce Hutchin. And I'm fortunate to have Dave Marsh on the show today. Now, Dave and I connected at the Iowa Deer Classic a couple months back, and I said, Dave, would you like to do a story about two things? One, the hunting tradition, where it is and where it's going, and two, talk to me about hunting Alaska, because I know a lot of you listeners want to go to Alaska, but aren't quite sure how it all fits together. So I've invited Dave to be a guest on the show today, and we're going to talk about those things. Dave Marsh, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bruce. Glad to be here. It was a pleasure to meet you as well, and we're kind of kindred spirits about some of the things that we've experienced and some of the things we are experiencing when it comes to the big topic of hunting, and maybe some of the things we will experience, not knowing where it all ends up one of these days.
And, I echo my sentiments exactly on that. And during the wintertime, you're down in the Kentucky and doing your shows and, doing everything an outfitter does in the off season. But let's start off and talk a little about Kentucky whitetails, because I've been hearing some stories. Personally, I haven't hunted Kentucky yet, but I will. There's some awesome bucks coming out of Kentucky these days. Why is that?
Well, I can tell you the stories are real. I've been fortunate enough to take some really nice bucks over the years, and I suppose the simplest answer of why it is because Kentucky really enjoys great wildlife management. The program has had that as a single focus at first, and they were very successful in restoring the whitetail deer population. I'm 56 years old, and when I was a kid, there wasn't any such thing as a white-tailed deer. And in fact, if somebody killed one, people from all over would come see it hanging on the porch or with the barn or wherever the thing was, because they were that unusual. And so those days are over for sure. And so once the Kentucky Department of Fish and Game was successful with the whitetails, then they moved on to the wild turkeys. Our season starts in about it starts Saturday, and they have been just as successful with that. It's excellent game management. These days, you can shoot 2 gobblers in the spring. You can shoot 4 hens in the fall, and this is nearly statewide. So they're the ones who deserve all the credit. And then I guess the third thing, the next thing that's on the list maybe is the ruffed grouse and the quail, because they've sort of taken the back burner with some of these more popular species. But in time, from what I understand, that's the next goal.
Well, thanks for that. Let's talk now. Do you hunt on your own farm, or are you hunting, state land? How do you hunt the whitetails?
I hunt on private property, and I'm in central Kentucky, so I'm in horse farm country, and I'm really privileged to be able to have a spot like that. With proximity of $1 million horses, a lot of people are reluctant to have people with high-powered rifles, and that's a dynamic that wouldn't work for a lot of people. But I've grown up in this kind of country, and I'm trusted, and it works really well, and I enjoy a bit of some privilege because of my access to these kind of areas. But it's not unique really to central Kentucky. Big deer, they're statewide, and of course Western Kentucky is probably highest on the map, and that's no surprise when you think about its proximity to southern Indiana, Illinois, and some of those other fabled deer hunting states.
So how do you like to hunt whitetails? Are you a tree stand guy, ground blind, spot and stalk?
No, it's mostly pasture land, open pasture land. So it's early and it's late, and typically hunting the edges, and it's sitting in the stand and choosing one that puts the wind in your favor. And spending as many hours as you can stand. Some of us, like you, I think, are pretty famous for being able to hang in there all day long. For one, can't do that. I've tried it at one time in Illinois, and I decided that that's just not what I'm made of. I have to come out of that thing, get refreshed, and then try it again in the evening. That's just the way I've got to handle it.
Understand. Now, are you hunting like redneck blinds, tower blinds, or box blinds, made out of wood?
Well, I have a tripod that's a portable tripod that I like quite a bit. I nestle it in the trees, and it breaks up the outline a little bit, but it gives me 360 degrees of motion. And in the area that I hunt, you need to keep your eyes open. Now, I'm not constantly spinning in the thing because I know the areas where the deer are most likely to present themselves. But on the other hand, I don't discount some of those areas, and from time to time, I do kick it around a little bit to look over areas that I'm not that I wouldn't think are as productive. The other stands that I like are ladder stands. I don't use self climbers. Again, I said that I'm 56 years old and I'm no chicken, but on the other hand, I'm very comfortable in sitting those ladder stands. It gets me 12 to 14 feet off the ground. A lot of times, my girlfriend will hunt with me, and it turns it into some of the social hunting that hunting is and should be celebrated for. It's pretty nice to spend time like that with somebody like and experience those things together.
Well, I'm with you on the ladder stands. I don't do hang-ons or self climbers anymore, and I actually I do a lot of ground blinds. Just the farms that I hunt. I'm fortunate to have some setups that either box blinds or towers or just pop up lines, and I find that's really helpful as you do get older. It's a heck of a lot safer too.
Yeah, I've visited people. I have my is you might bet. I'm not comfortable in those non-blinds. I don't like climbing a tree with those pegs, and maybe the stand I like at the very least is one of those wood houses these days. To me, it takes me out of nature, and the reason I'm there is because I like nature. I'm not trying to get away from it. If it rains, then I get wet, and if the wind blows, then I hunt it on a windy day. I don't want to. I want to immerse myself in the whole experience, and if I want to be in a little house like that, I can stay home and that same kind of experience. So I'm just not interested in that sort of approach. But personal thing, who knows?
Sure. And with you being the master guide up in Alaska, so you're hunting later in the season, I would think, because you're up there in July and August, September, October, you shut everything down and head home. Is that pretty much true?
Yeah, correct. That's correct, Bruce. My hunting, I do grizzly hunting, spring grizzly hunting in the Arctic, and it is certainly spring in June in the Arctic. The old saying is there's only two seasons up there, winter and July. It's kind of funny, but there's a lot of truth to it. It can be 80 degrees one day, literally, and snowing the next. And so it's a dynamic weather pattern. So, and then typically my season will wrap up, my June season will wrap up, and I'm back in the lower 48 the month of July, then back up into the Arctic for August sheep and grizzly. I'm down in southwest Alaska for moose and brown bear, and then I finish off with brown bear hunts, specifically brown bear hunts, the month of October, and then I wrap it up.
And we'll get into that in a little bit, but I wanted to give the folks some background on your Kentucky, whitetail hunting. Just share three things about how people can reach out to you. What's the best way to get a hold of Dave Marsh?
Well, I suppose the best way and the most personal way is the telephone. My telephone number is 859-338-4710. I also have a website, biggamebigcountry.com, and my email address is fairly easy too, Dave at biggamebigcountry.com. But to write an email to me, to say that you're interested in a moose hunt in 2019. Can you give me some information? That's not going to go too far with me. There is so much information. You actually need to call me so we can talk about all the nuances that go into this kind of a trip. So that may be a good starting point, but don't expect much to come out of it with all the information that it entails.
And thanks for that. And I love the 338. That's my favorite cartridge when I head places where there's big bears, because I don't carry my 375 Ruger because it is just too big for some of the critters I shoot. But I love the 338. What's your thought on big game rifles for Alaska or any place a person traveled to where, you know, you're not the apex predator that a grizzly or a wolf is?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, many arguments and many friendships have been broken up over this kind of topic. But the caliber that I'm most fond of, or I'm going to call it little stuff, is a 7 millimeter Magnum. I've shot a lot of things with that over the years, and like all of us, we just get hooked into something, and that's what we end up with. So I've done quite well with it. I would say that without question, that most guys that come to Alaska to tackle whatever we hunt, whether it be sheep or grizzlies or brown bears or moose, the 300 Winchester Magnum is the caliber of choice. I think it's a good one. I really don't have any problem with it, especially these days when ammunition is premium as it's all become, whether it be a Barnes X bullet or a trophy bonded bear claw or a Swift A-frame. Pretty nice, and it really brings some of these calibers that you may think could be just a little bit on the light side to a new dimension because of that great bullet manufacturing these days. And then lastly, I would say the caliber that I really depend on the most is my 375 H&H. It's there's just no question when you squeeze the trigger what the result's going to be on the far end. It is an absolutely devastating killer. And in my line of work, when we're going in to find these wounded things, you just have to have something like that you have total confidence in, and that certainly has given me what I need.
Yeah, and I think about the times I've been up there, and I shoot 338. I shoot the Nosler Acubon 200 grain, so I can reach out and touch somebody, or I've got enough oomph to put them down. But in your line of business, every guide I've been with, he always carries the most gun that he knows he's confident in, and he can put whatever they're facing down. And that's the biggest thing, listeners, get a gun you shoot well. And there's 338, 7 millimeter mag, and 300 Win Mag are all great cartridges when you're traveling and there's some bigger critters, because you are going to be backed up unless you're doing it DIY. Then I'd have somebody carrying the heaviest caliber you can shoot well. And that's the other big thing. Let's talk about that a little bit, because so many people, they'll say, oh, I'm going to Alaska, I'm going to Kodiak Island, I'm going to hunt brown bears, I got to have a 375, but they can't shoot it worth a darn. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's correct. And we're back to the 300. Over time, I just have the experience that tells me that most people, they max out about the 300 Winchester Magnum. That's a zipper of a cartridge, a caliber in a cartridge, and it's a handful. And I think that most people, when they get to the 338, legendary. Maybe that's what's gotten them kind of worked up about the whole thing, and they just know that it's going to kick, and so they anticipate that, and they begin to get flinching problems because of it. But so that's why I'm very comfortable with somebody that has a 338. I generally feel like it's not too much rifle. They can handle it, and it's certainly enough rifle for whatever gang we're tackling. I will also say that, you're right, Bruce, about outfitters and whoever having the proper caliber for the animal they're hunting and whatnot. If I were a brown bear guide in Southeast Alaska, where it's more of a jungle environment, and you're going up streams, salmon streams, and come around the corner, and there you may be faced with the problem. Well, I would jump up to the 416. I believe that would be my next caliber. I doubt I would go 458. Probably too much caliber for me, but 416 seems like the likely choice, and that may be what I would use there. But with the country that I'm hunting, somewhat open, and uh, how I know that the shots lay out, the 375 is just nearly ideal for that Southwest Alaska rolling mountainous brushy country.
And thanks for that. And one thing I'll add, whatever caliber you shoot the best, and 30-06 kills a lot of game because, especially if you go with a guide, take the rifle you shoot the best because you're going to have somebody backing you up. And, if you get a camp and zero in your rifle, which you should, because you've traveled thousands of miles, um, and everybody's going to get confident when you start putting them in the black, and your group is right on because nothing helps a guide and outfitter have confidence to realize, okay, they can handle the gun. Because every time I go to the bench when I've been traveling, you get on the bench, you get set up, and that outfitter guide's watching you from the second you get out of the plane or whatever and get to that bench, and he's seeing how you shoot. And so have your routine down and bring confidence to the deal. And because if you start flinching, he knows how the thing isn't going to go as smoothly as you wanted. Your thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely right. From the get go, when we meet one another, whether it be over the telephone or through an email or face to face at one of these trade shows, the decisions are being made, and that everybody's trying to decide how the whole thing goes, and we are each evaluating one another. And believe it or not, that's exactly what's happening, and that process continues on the whole experience by the time we meet to when you get to Alaska, and then when you are in Alaska. So it's still a new relationship, and we're still trying to figure out the exact direction it all goes. And when it does get to the point where we're sighting in those rifles before the hunt begins in earnest, quite frankly, I may have my binoculars to my eyes to see where those bullet holes might go. But my dirty little secret is that's not exactly what I'm doing at all. I'm actually looking out of the side of my binoculars at how you shoot and how you handle that rifle, because that's much more important to me than where those bullets are actually ending up on that target. I know that they're never going to be right if I can see your shooting style is off. And so with a little time, we can get that corrected. But you're absolutely right, Bruce, that it's an important part of the one of the most important parts of the process. And I definitely am going to make sure we're going to do right by the hunter and certainly do right by the game and not have errant shots that are going to lead to wounding and loss.
Let's switch it up just a little bit and talk about the hunting tradition. I know we spend a lot of time at the Iowa Deer Classic, talking about where the hunting tradition's going. And both you and I have a rich hunting tradition. And I think of my grandkids, they're fortunate because I do what I do. But a lot of kids aren't, and a lot of men aren't. And I even know my own son, he loves to hunt antelope and other critters, but when it comes to the big game, he just doesn't have the interest that I did. And you have to accept that. And I guess that's where I'm sharing it. Whatever kids want to do, open up the book and see what they're going to do with it, because you never know. But it's our job to introduce people to the great sport of hunting, because it is an adventure. It's just not about the kill. Your thoughts on that, Dave?
Absolutely right. And these trips are expensive. There's no doubt about it. Any trip that's outside of your back door is going to be expensive. There's just the level of distance involved, and then airplanes and non-resident hunting licenses, and it can be a never-ending thing when you think about it. But again, if there's a will, there's a way, and you put your mind to do something, then it can be accomplished. A lot of the things in my life, professionally and personally, have been accomplished with that sort of attitude in mind. And Some people look at me and think that it's remarkable. Well, I don't really think that it's remarkable. I think that it should be status quo, I guess, because I've always been driven that way. But to keep the interest alive and to do the things it takes to accomplish the things you want, it just takes some time and it takes some effort and it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And there's really nothing that's impossible if you put your mind to it, including some of these very exotic and very expensive big game trips. It's within reach. You just have to do it.
Yeah, and you think when you start hunting, I would my first trip out west was, I think it was 1975, and once I did that first trip out west, it was it was Katie bar to the door.
Yeah,
I didn't stop in the Rockies. I kept going north, and it just the adventures. Unfortunately, I've hunted from Kujawa, Fort Chimo, Hudson Bay, all the way to Iliamna and places north of that and such. So but I'm fortunate because that's what I decided to do in my life. I didn't join the golf club, or I didn't I'm just trying to think the things people do and spend money at. So I did two things: I hunted and I fly fished as a young man and through my earning years, and that's how I did it, listeners. I just made the choice, and I think Dave, you've got some more comments on that.
That's it really parallels my experience too. The first time I went out west was 1976. It was a 16th birthday present, and I ended up in Montana on an elk hunt. Now, needless to say, I didn't get an elk. I've been elk hunting 14 times and have not killed an elk. So, not to say yes, and it's in five different western states, one province, early season, late season, mid season, backpack, ranchers, horseback, you name it, I've done it, and I know my way around the kitchen. But the deal is, and I don't mind at this stage because it's a great sales tool for me to tell people that just because you go on one of these trips doesn't mean you're going to get whatever it is you're after. Now, we provide hunts, we don't provide elk, so to speak. So. But I was the same way as you. I was when I just was enamored with that Western experience. And at 16, somebody turned to me and they saw me looking at that. There was an elk hanging on a meat pole from the hunt before, and that person commented, "You know what? I knew when I saw that. I knew when I saw that look in your eyes that you were changed forever, and your life would never be the same." And that's pretty observant because. That's what turned me on. That was the singular moment.
Now, there's an elk herd on Fognac up in Alaska. Have you ever hunted them there?
No, I've not. The permits are rather hard to draw. The antler quality is pretty small, but the bodies are huge on them. But I haven't had the interest, nor do I have the time. I'm so caught up in my own professional goings on that I don't really have time to hunt my own critters in Alaska. However, there's also a nice elk herd in Kentucky. In fact, largest elk herd east of the Mississippi, as many of you may know, that is a possibility. And I put in for that every year. My girlfriend has actually been successful in drawing a cow tag some years ago, and I went over there with her, and she was lucky enough to get one. And so, and I have another friend that's actually drawn 2 bull tags over time. So when we talk about what we were talking about a few minutes ago was if there's a will, there's a way. You got to keep trying. Nothing is impossible. And there's a statement right there that shows it's not impossible. If that guy had given up putting in for an elk tag since he already got drawn, he would have never gotten a second one. So you just got to stick with it, got to keep with it, and you got to keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I was at ATA this winter in January, and a friend of mine had been on the show, Todd Duff, and he guides. And actually, we did the show. He was glassing on a ridge. We did the whole show from his pickup because he had good cell connection. And he said, just put in for tag. Just put in for tag until you get one, and then we'll go elk hunting. So that's what I did. So, they call me Mr. Lucky, so I might be heading your way.
Hey, come on. I'll be happy to have you. We'd have some fun together, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But what Dave and I are talking about, folks, there's lots of opportunity, and you don't have to head out west to to hunt elk. You know, most of my listeners in North America are whitetail hunters, but more and more people come up to me at shows or email me and say, Bruce, I really want to do some of the things that you've been able to do, and and I just tell them because I've got a ranch that I drew a tag on here in Colorado, and it's pricey, but his average is over 300, 330, and it's just a gorgeous ranch. And what he does with guides is says, okay, um, you're gonna have once in a lifetime hunt, 10 years. You're gonna come to the ranch, have a great hunt. You're gonna see elk, and no, it's not a guarantee. It's not a preserve or high fence. It's none of that. They're wild elk. But last year, and I saw the pictures of the bull. He took over a 400 in Colorado on a private ranch, about 15,000 acres, and for $10,000, that's a hell of a deal for that opportunity to hunt that class of bulls. So that's my 2 cents on that. And Dave, how are we doing on time? Because I know you got to do a short errand. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, if you can give me 5 minutes, uh, Bruce, I'll be able to get back with you. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Yep. And hey folks, we're gonna take a little break here. Dave's got to do one errand, and we'll be back, and then we're continuing the show. So at 41 minutes, we're taking a break. This is Bruce Hutchin, your host, and stay tuned for part 2 with Dave Marsh, Master Guide from Alaska. Big game, big country.
You still there, Bruce?
Yep. Knock it
Okay,
off.
we're doing good. Okay,
Okay.
I'll be back with you in a second.
Okay. Hey, folks, and this Bruce Hutchin, your host of Whitetail Rendezvous, and I'm on with Dave Marsh, Master Guide from Big Country, Big Game, who guides in Alaska and spends the winter in Kentucky. So, Dave, we were talking about the hunting tradition, and let's talk about that, about recruitment. I know we spent a lot of time on that at Iowa Deer Classic, and what do people need to do, especially older gentlemen, and that we're getting to make sure their grandkids, their neighbors, their friends, girlfriends, wives, whatever, are you know, getting into the out of the doors. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, I think that young need to be pushed just a little bit on it. I'm not so sure they're going to find it on their own, and I'm not so sure that if you get them started with it and they don't really seem like they like it all that much the first time, well, it might take a second time, and it might take a third time. We as adults have to make decisions for others that can't really make them, and I think that if they're led in the right way, if a proper leader leads, then a follower will follow. And I'm not so sure that all these things are going to take on the first go round. Even when a child may play football or baseball for the first time, he might not enjoy it all that much, but maybe the second time's a little better than the third time, and then begins to understand the rules of the game and how it works, and then maybe embraces it. And I think that that same approach needs to be taken toward hunting. And I think that it's also, when it comes to older friends or say partners, women, wives, girlfriends, that just by the very nature of them being invited along is enough sometimes. And to dumb it down a little bit, as it were, you don't need to go out there and then explain to her how important it is for you to find a 180 class whitetail. I think she's going to be just as satisfied to sit there and watch does come out of the edge of the woods, late in the evening, and just make a night of it, rather than to put the serious note about it all. I think that turns more people away than adds to. I can certainly say that's true even for me these days. It's not about that. It's about the whole experience. And sure, we'd all like to get lucky and get something that's above and beyond, and something that's better than average. But the fact is, we're there for the hunt, and we're there for the enjoyment of it all. And it's the big picture that what the quality experience is all about. And when you take somebody young, or when you take somebody that's not as familiar with it as you are, you definitely need to keep those kind of things in mind.
When you think about that, how would you approach your wife? Let's take a listener. He's late 20s and he's married, got a couple kids, and he's got a 120. He can hunt whitetails on. What's the best way to get the non-hunting wife, girlfriend, into the stand with you?
Well, I think that it can become a family affair. If the kids are somewhat involved and they like it, and then the wife likes it as well, and it becomes something that everybody can enjoy at the same time. And of course, I think that all women are. My girlfriend certainly really likes cooking new recipes and trying things out, and there's an aspect there that seems like it would be interesting to explore as well. But I don't know, just a peace of mind. Maybe when she's out there and she knew her kids were not getting into trouble, they're sort of under your wing to some extent, someplace on that farm, and the peace of mind and the enjoyment of knowing that everything seems to be more or less right in the world. I think that would be the solitude, and I think that might be enough of a selling point in a busy world.
How do you say to your clients? What do you say to clients when grandpa brings up grandson or father brings up son, and they won't get off their electronic digits or electronic tools?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm fortunate in that those things don't work in the remote country that I hunt in, so that's not an issue for me, and thank goodness it's not. It years ago when I was an assistant guide, I was pretty shocked to find that these men. This was probably in the early '90s. That these men would bring hunting magazines up to the Arctic. They're in a sheep camp, and they're sitting in lawn chairs, the camp chairs, reading hunting magazines. And here they are in some of the most fabulous, legendary hunting ground that exists, and they'd rather read about it and look at a guy's picture of him and his whitetail than travel 30, 40, 50 yards to get on a little knob and see if they could see a wolf in the distance, or groups of caribou, or maybe go down to the river and fish some. So I suppose there's always been distractions. Maybe that's the way to put it. And if we can eliminate those, or sometimes people just need to be made aware of what they're doing, and they may look at you and think, "Wow, you're right," and put it away, because it becomes so second nature for them to be on these telephones or on an iPad or even reading a magazine in the old days that that maybe that's all it is. It's just an awareness.
Yeah, and I think of the times I've traveled, and I travel with a laptop, um, but that always stays in camp. And yeah, if there's some things I had to do, I took care of them, but I never had to worry about it. I just made sure the guide outfitter, they had a sat phone, or or Motorola's or whatever, so they could communicate. Other than that, I'm there for the adventure, and I think that's the one thing I'd share with all the listeners. You're there for the adventure, and yeah, it costs a lot of money, and the opportunity may or may not present itself. I know a couple of people. One guy in particular has been to the Yukon stone sheep hunting more than once, and let's leave it at that. And that's an expensive hunt, yeah. And I'm going to ask Dave what he does when I come up and you guide me on a. It doesn't matter what the hunt is, and all of a sudden, the weather comes in. It's a 10-day hunt. I only hunt for 5 days. What do you do in those situations with the client?
Well, it's case by case as far as return trips and that sort of thing. I've done when it becomes something so simple as weather, that's pretty cut and dry, and there's nothing I could help about that either. And I actually work much harder on a hunt that's unsuccessful than on one that I do. You shoot a ram on the third day, you're happy as you can be. I'm totally satisfied, and we're camping at that point. So who could want more? That's a no lose situation. On the other hand, this thing grinds out to the 12th day of a hunt, and people are frustrated, and the weather's been tough, and we've been going at it hard every single day. It's just as hard on me as it is on you guys, and I have just as many expenses. My expenses don't change when a ram hits the ground. That has nothing to do with anything that I'm doing. I provide the opportunity for people to come into big game country where there's big game animals and we do the best. I'm trying to facilitate that, and that's my selling point. That's what I am, is that experience, and the number of people that have done that with me in the past are my references, and there's no amount of information that you can't get from me or any other outfitter when it comes time to do one of these trips. And so there's no reason to say, yeah, that didn't work out, and he wasn't this, and he wasn't that, and some other things. Yeah, he probably pretty much was, no matter if that's good or bad. And by you having done your homework before one of these trips takes place, you ought to be able to find those things out. So maybe the long and short answer of this is, if you were on a trip with me, Bruce, and we did everything we possibly could to try to find the particular animal you're looking for, you kept your head about you, you had manners in camp, you were a gentleman about the trip, you were well prepared, you didn't break down physically or mentally as this event continued to shake out, there's a grand possibility that I would make a financial adjustment on a return trip at some point. And I've done it many, many, many times. On the other hand, I'll be the first to say that I've been with some people that after day one, I knew that this was a disastrous sort of relationship. And the sooner that trip was over, win, lose, or draw, the better I was going to like it. And that's just the way it is. And so it can go either way. But when you're on a trip, the hunting fraternity is small. If you don't know already, you'll begin to find out. And not only is it small for outfitters, but it's small for clients too. And people do talk. And if it were me, and it is me, I'd behave yourself, because sooner or later somebody's going to find out.
Yeah, and I think of places I go, and listeners, I'm just going to share personal stories. I've only had one bad situation with a guide and outfitter, and I'll tell you why. Because when I started doing this, I talked to some people that do it for a living, writers and such, and guys that I know had been out there and done it, and they said, Bruce, if every 5 hunts you have a bad one, that's not a bad odds as much as you're going to hunt or do hunt. And when I thought about that, I've been extremely fortunate that I've had weather and I've had all these things, but because I did my homework and interviewed the guide and outfitter as much as he was interviewing me before I got there, I already knew that we had a relationship. And some guys think I'm crazy because I booked a hunt, let's say 18 months in advance, get the deposits and everything, and then I'd be emailing him or talking to him or somebody in his camp every single month because I just put down some money and I wanted to make it the best experience. But what I've learned is that if I do that, then I've got a relationship built up. I know what to expect. I got on Google Earth and I've flown the territory. On Google Earth, you can fly the territory. You know his concession. Yeah, it might be 1,000 square miles or whatever, but I spent the time. So when I get to camp, I said, are we going to go to the Three Basin or are we going to head up to Solitude Lake for that goat? Or are we going to hunt this range? And the guys look at me and go, how did you do that? I said, you told me where we're going to hunt. I'm coming up here. And so I want to know, if you fall off your horse, if you fall down the cliff, how the heck did I get out of here? And it was more a survival mode because I wanted to know that if something went south really bad, and it can, that I could get out and get back to the trailhead, get back to a road, and just wait till somebody came by and picked me up and we sort it all out. That's my thought. Your thoughts?
Yep, I'm in total agreement. I think you need to engage. You're going on a big trip. The things that I offer really can be considered the Super Bowl of hunting. I mean, it's just as grand as it gets. It's even more grand than, let's call it, modern Africa. I'm not going to compare what I do in Alaska to Mozambique or Tanzania in the old days and Kenya in older days than that. But it's certainly more of a hunt than Namibia and South Africa. And I know from experience this, so it's not something that I've just guessed. And when you're in these wilderness situations that are like that, you better be committed and you better pay attention to what's going on. And I can tell you that I wouldn't leave it to anybody, outfitter, and I don't care what his reputation is, for the absolute, for safety in its most absolute form. I wouldn't go on any trip anywhere without my own personal survival kit, whether that be a space blanket and matches and trioxane bars for fire starting and a little bit of food and just, just something that can get you through the night. And also that pertains to a first aid kit as well. Self perseverance. You need to hang in there, and you need to be able to make it without that person, without him along all the time. Because I've been on trips that I saw some fairly reckless activity, and it didn't bother me altogether because I knew that I was going to be fine. But I don't know if most would have pre-thought those things out and been able to get themselves out of a grind if, in fact, they got one. I too use satellite telephones, and they are a great survival tool. There's no doubt about it. But before the hunt, before my hunts, I have a client orientation, and I tell my men where my deluxe first aid kit is. I actually have a hands-on, turn-on, use the satellite telephone. I have an aircraft radio that I have a hands-on, turn-on, communicate with the radio while they're in camp there, and make sure that they know how to use my communication equipment. What if a bear gnawed my hands and I wasn't being able to push the buttons, or I fell off of something and broke my jaw and wasn't able to communicate what needed to be done with these tools? So they need to know that, and I'm going to make sure that they do on a trip like that. And if you ever go on a trip, these satellite telephones are standard operating procedure now. I would insist that my outfitter show me how to use that phone before I left camp. I just would have to have that. Further, within my satellite telephones, I actually have cards in there that are laminated. So if a guy forgets how to use the phone, it's step by step in there. But just before the hunt, we've put all these things away and we're getting ready to leave, and I'll pick one guy and I'll say, "Hey, Bill, come here. Show me how to use it. Hey, Bruce, come here. Show me how to use this satellite telephone." And it's hands on, and he's on the spot. And you'd be surprised how many people picked it up because I told them how important it was for them to know that. So you better watch yourself when you're out there. It's a big deal. And reading those maps is handy too. My area is so broad that there may not be a big application for that, but certainly communication equipment, first aid gear, and survival is paramount.
Now, your concession or your assigned area, how big is your guide area?
My area in the Arctic, the government has allowed me 795,000 acres, and I'm the only person that's allowed to. Yeah, isn't that great? I'm the only one that's allowed. I'm the only one allowed to commercially operate there, and it's just a privilege beyond words. It makes me the ambassador of that area and a caretaker, and it really is important to me about how people come into it and how they relate to that kind of country. We live green. We do the right thing when it comes to hygiene and getting water, and how fires are built and how human waste is handled, and it's a big deal. And we need to think about that even in our lower 48 hunting, because we leave a footprint, and we need to minimize that the best we can. My area where I hunt brown bear and moose is in Southwest Alaska, and it's in the largest state park in the United States. It's a 1.6 million acre state park, and then I have state land that's out to the side of that permitted by DNR, and so it gives me over 2 million acres of area to work with.
And you're the only guy in there.
Great.
Permitted, right? You're the only guy permitted?
In my area up north, yes. Residents, and well, they should, are allowed to hunt anywhere they want to in Alaska. But as a commercial operator, I'm the only one allowed that privilege in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Secondly, the area down south, there's many outfitters that have permits in that area. But again, when you're talking about a land mass of some 2 million acres, we're not stepping on each other. And very, very rarely have I ever seen anybody boots on the ground while I'm conducting a hunt with my clients. Generally, you'll see airplanes flying over, but at heights, and people landing in the distance, or you can hear a plane revving up in the distance, which means it's coming off a lake, but you may or may not see that. And we don't interfere with each other. We don't need to. There's a lot of land. There's a lot of country, and there's a lot of animals, and there's no sense fighting over it all.
I got to ask you, have you been to Kavik, Suikins, that Life is Old Zero? Have you ever met her up in America?
No, Sue Evans. No, I've not.
Awaken.
I've not met her. One of my good friends from Fort Yukon is Jaimo Korth, and he's on a show called The Last Alaskans, and he's quite the real deal. That guy, he's really remarkable in what he's done. He lived in Wisconsin and saw, the story goes, he saw a flock of geese flying north. He was in a factory job and was out having a lunch break and saw a flock of geese flying north. And he says, "That's the life for me. I'm quitting this, and that's where I'm going." And he settled in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And if there ever was a modern day Jeremiah Johnson, he is it, and he is the real deal, no question.
Oh, that's great. You know, like I said, I've been a few places in Alaska, and folks, it's a hard country, and it's a country that can flat ass kill you. That's
It is
you know,
truly. That's Hey, Bruce, I'm really glad to hear you say that. That's the reality of that. It wants to kill you, and you better come prepared not to be killed. Because if you let down your guard, chances are pretty good you're not going to make it.
and my 2 cents, and I know I'm talking a lot about this because I flat out love it. That you can get on the scree, and there's only one thing you can do, and you got to ride it out, and you can't tumble, and there's ways to do it, and people tell you how to do it. Or you could be in a raft, and that sucker flips. You're screwed because the water's too cold. If you're crossing a river, not a creek, but actually a river, take out all your straps, and yeah, you got to take your backpack over, but get yourself a staff and unloosen all your straps, because if you dump, forget everything that's in your pack. You want to live, and then sort it out later, because you can go downstream and find your pack. But it just goes on and on and on and on. And Dave has thousands of stories of where he's been up against it, and it was life and death. Share one of those stories when things weren't going right, and it was a rodeo with your horses, or you had a bear down and you had to go get it.
No livestock or no motorized contrivances allowed in either one of my wilderness areas. But sometimes it's the things that you don't expect to get you. It's fascinating to hear a guy talk about being attacked by wounded grizzlies, and that's happened to me without question. And in fact, it happened last June. But sometimes it's the things that, and all that's great for selling hunts, and people can be on the edge of their seat about that. But on the other hand, the thing that probably really is more important is the things you don't expect that'll get you. Two come quickly to mind. One was a pack out years ago when I was an assistant guide, and again, this is somewhere about 1990. I say quite positively it was 1995. And I had two German clients with me, and the father had killed a caribou. And in those days, you could bone the meat out in that particular area I was hunting in. So I had a moose pack with a freighter frame, which Coleman came out with years ago, or Camp Trails actually came out with years ago. And I had that thing stuffed to the gills with that meat in there. There was so much meat in it, the drawstring at the top of the pack would only come close enough to about a paper plate, because of they just didn't have any more room to cinch up. And then on top of that, I had that guy's caribou head cut off at the atlas joint, right below the jaw, strapped onto the back of the pack. So I had, I don't know, maybe 125, 150 pounds on my pack, and off I went across that tundra. Well, you stumble and you go, and you stumble a little bit, and you're making a direction, but it's not pretty how you're doing it. Well, at one point I fell, and I fell between two tussocks, and that load was so heavy that I couldn't break my fall with my hands necessarily, because my elbows buckled and bent under them. But it caused my hands to be underneath my body with no leverage whatsoever. Now, between those tussocks, there was a little rivulet of water, as there often is in that wet country. And I wouldn't say it was more than about 3 inches deep. But that meat and that pack had rolled up on the back of my head. I had no way to get my hands out. I'm pinned between two tussocks on either side, and I'm actually drowning in about 3 inches of water. And I'm truly just about done. And fortunately, the guy that was walking behind me, the client that didn't have a pack, um, grabbed the bar of my pack and pulled that thing off me, rolled it over very quickly, and I gasped for breath, and I came back alive. But that's how close I came to dying in something that I would have never guessed in a million years that might be the way I'd go, and it was close.
So real people, real places, and real scenarios. And you heard it from a guy that's been there and spent all the time. So, um, lessons learned. Let's switch it up. And so, a couple of guys from Wisconsin, want to come to Alaska, and they met you at Iowa Deer Classic. Just tell us. We got about 10 minutes or so left in the show. Tell us what's going to happen now. And they're flat, interest in coming. So you're developing that relationship. They haven't given you the deposit yet, and let's take that till they get to camp.
Sure. Okay. So typically, how you've laid that out. I'll meet a couple of guys at the show, and they both have the same kind of keen interest in hunting Alaska, and they go, "Yeah, we really want to do this someday." And might come back with, well, I think a lot of people really want to do this one day. How much do you really want to do this one day? Well, we went to Africa last year, and we went to Canada a couple of years ago and got a bear, and we just really ready for some wilderness adventure. We both got a little bit of time, and we both got a little bit of money, and we've kind of settled on maybe we want to go brown bear hunting. And I say, well, that's great, and so I'll pull out my map. I'll show them exactly where they might expect to be hunting in broad terms, as far as lower 48 and to where Anchorage and Fairbanks on the map, so they can get themselves oriented about what we're talking about in the largest sense. Once they're familiar with the kind of country they're going to be hunting in, I'll tell them a little bit about how the hunt's going to take place, the success rates, the average size bears in the area, what they might expect, and I sort of try to find out what their expectations are too. If they're looking for a bear, one of these big bears that you see at shows sometimes that are 10.5 foot bear, the likelihood of those kind of bears being in my area are not so great. And so if that's really what they've got in mind and they're willing to pay those kind of prices that those areas command for an opportunity perhaps like that, then they're looking in the wrong spot, and I steer them to the peninsula or Kodiak Island. On the other hand, if they just want a good experience together, they want to have a chance to get a bear, maybe even a color phase, well, that's exactly the kind of place that I have. And the bears that I take are, on average, 8-footers. The trips are nice. It's float plane country. They spend a lot of time together, so it's not like one guy's off with his guide someplace and the other guy's off with his guide someplace. We spend time together and make build up the camaraderie of the experience and have a good time with it all. They'll have all the associated paperwork before the hunt. They'll know exactly how to fly in. There's no hidden expenses and hidden charges, and there's no such thing as small print. It's all in black and white, and I make sure everybody has that in advance, a written copy as well as the discussion that I've had with them beforehand. And then once they arrive in Alaska, I meet them at the airport, get them settled into a bed and breakfast. We have an orientation generally, and it goes over this satellite telephone we were talking about earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Alaska's full of laws, and they're stiff laws, and there's no gray. So compliance issues are strict, and we adhere to all the rules. And I want to make sure everybody knows them, so they're not surprised if that's brought into question at some point. So in addition to all that, they'll have the necessary paperwork that will accompany them to camp. I'm a licensed vendor, so I can sell them licenses and tags as needed. And the hunt will progress for the next 8-10 days. We'll be flown out via de Havilland and Beaver generally. And we'll hunt until we get our game and celebrate after we get it, and look for more game after we've got it, and continue on until the hunt draws to an end. And then back in Dillingham at the end of the hunt, everybody gets cleaned up, has a nice stay in a bed and breakfast at the end of the adventure. And the next day, I get them to the airport with the trophies and the luggage, and off they go back to the lower 48 after having spent probably, well, what many of them will attest by the letters maybe you've even seen in my booth, the trip of a lifetime. And truly, I totally get what people are after, and I totally try to provide exactly that. The memories, the good memories of a lifetime.
Now, Dillingham, Bristol Bay, fly rod. Should I
Yes.
pack a fly rod?
Well, it's a salmon. It's actually the salmon capital of the world, truly.
Yes, it
But
is.
some of the lakes, depending on where we're hunting, if it's moose hunting, we're moose hunting, and if it's moose hunting, we're moose hunting. That's where the money is, and so it would be likely that it would be on a pothole, and you might not be able to find anything other than maybe grayling and for sure northern pike in a spot like that. So if you were really interested in doing a cast and blast, perhaps, then you probably need to concentrate on the place that has the very best of moose hunting. That's what I would do. And you would concentrate on the place that had the very best fishing. And the two may not be overlapping. So you'd need to, after a discussion with me, we could work through that and try to figure out how to capitalize on both of those wishes.
Yeah, one thing I learned really quick, especially float planes and stuff, pike are fun. There's some huge pike in Alaska, folks. And every place, I've been grayling and you catch a few grayling, you get some bacon or oil and you get the skillet going and you throw some onions and some potatoes. That's pretty good eating.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that, especially if you have surf and turf and it's coupled with moose heart or tenderloin from even black bear. Black bear is awfully good to eat in Alaska. Those blueberry-fed black bears are phenomenal with that marbled meat, and it's something to behold.
So when do you decide, that this client's, gonna measure up, and because there's gonna be some times when you talk a person enough, you just go, I'm booked, or whatever you want to say.
It's pretty good, but you're kind of putting me on the spot a little bit.
Well, but that's truth. I mean, we're talking
It is true. Listen, people, their money and their time comes hard. So does mine. And there's no sense in somebody signing on to a deal like this with somebody that they aren't completely compatible with. And that goes both ways. And they're making decisions at those shows just like I'm making decisions at those shows. I do turn a lot of people away because I can tell that maybe that their focus is just different than my offering. If a guy says, "Well, Dave, I'm only going to have one shot at this, and I just really going to have to make sure that I get what I'm after," that's probably not going to be a good matchup for me. I think that the guy is going to get what he's after, but if that is the whole value of his trip, I just would rather not have the pressure. I'd rather go with somebody that says, "Yeah, Dave, I've been dreaming this all my life. And do you think I'd have a fairly good chance to get what I'm after?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure do. Lots of other people before you certainly have, but it's up to you." Again, buyer beware. You need to dig in. You need to call my references. You need to find out whether this is the trip for you. I'm not a salesman in such a way that I'm going to talk you into or out of something unless I know for sure that you are definitely the right guy or definitely the wrong guy. Most of the time, it's up to you to find out if this is the trip that you have in mind based on all the information that you've been able to gather. So it's a process. Bruce, you may not know this, but probably I've been doing these shows for over 20 years, these live appearances. And I bet you I've not taken 6 checks sight unseen for the very first time at one of those shows where a guy talks to me and goes, "Yep, this is for me. I'm going to write you a deposit check." I think they would be foolish to do that, as a matter of fact. I think that if I were going to go on a trip with somebody in a trip of this nature, I'd really want to find out what that outfitter's wife's maiden name was. I want to know what's going on. And I cannot afford to spend money like that and spend time like that with something that I'm just stumbling into. So that would certainly be my approach, and I certainly encourage it.
Well, thanks for that. We're at the soft stop of the show, so you got a few minutes to thank past clients, give some clients' name for testimonies, and anything else you want to do for a couple minutes. You get the mic, and then we'll wrap the show.
Well, it's just to say that my career has been really fulfilling, I guess, Bruce. I've never really thought about it, but given the delivery quite this way. But my career really has been fulfilling. It's an avocation. I'm doing the right thing. I would have never thought that basically killing for hire would be something that I would enjoy, since I'm so intimate with nature and wildlife, and I don't see animals as targets altogether. I know what we're into, and I know what we're trying to do, but I also know that that's part of the bigger picture. And I'm very satisfied that I'm where I am, and I think I've changed a lot of people's lives and given them a different way of looking at the same old thing too when it comes to some of this. And maybe we do need to get away a little further away from the killing and a little closer to the hunting, and a little less from the record book and the experience itself. And again, let's not get too worked up about it. No sense letting the hunting get in the way of the fun. Let's enjoy ourselves and see where it all goes at the end of the day, or at the end of the week, or at the end of the 2 weeks.
Dave Marsh, Master Guide, Big Game, Big Country Outfitting up in Alaska. Thank you so much for being part of the show, and on behalf of 1,000 listeners throughout North America, it's just been a joy and a pleasure. And as you're talking, I've got my videotapes running in my mind. I'm going, yeah. And it's fun because I do hold those memories forever, and people and places. That's I got a couple of critters on the wall, but other than that, it's the people and it's the adventures and that I take, and they're priceless, folks. So on behalf of that, Dave Marsh, thanks, and look forward to catching up with you, because we hopefully, if I draw that Kentucky tag, we'll connect and you can come along for the fun.
Yeah, and then there's that other place called Alaska.
Next episode is going to take us back to Wisconsin. We're going to meet up with somebody who lives sort of kind of between Madison and Milwaukee, and his name's Tyler Median. Tyler and his brothers and a couple other friends started a company called Timber Valley Outdoors. Why? Because they love hunting and fishing. Everything Wisconsin has to offer in the outdoors, they love. So they said, why not start a little show? And it's grown into a big show, but the thing I want you to grab from the show is hunting suburban deer. Tyler's going to answer those questions when you listen to the show.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Whitetail Rendezvous, where you can listen and learn from the experts so you can be more successful on your next hunt. Until next time, listen, learn, and succeed.